we'd like to welcome everyone here this evening for our April Speaker Series event. And we're pleased to have with us tonight Jaina Moan. Jaina used to be the Executive Director for Friends of Gold Butte, but now she is the External Affairs Director for the Nature Conservancy. And she's going to speak tonight on climate change.
Thanks, Brenda. How are you all doing? Thank you for having me here during your speaker series. I see a lot of familiar names, and it's so nice to see your names on the screen, and I miss you all. So let me share my screen because I have a PowerPoint presentation for you all to talk about climate action in Nevada. So as Brenda mentioned, I used to be the executive director for the Friends of Gold Butte. And when I left the Friends of Gold Butte, I started working for the Nature Conservancy in Nevada as their external affairs director, but also their lead on climate action. And so they have, TNC did not have a climate action program in Nevada before I started. So this is a little bit of a summary and a lot of information maybe on what I have been up to for the past 3.5 years. And I'll just note this view is from our River Fork Ranch property in Nevada, which is located along the front of the Eastern Sierra. TNC owns several properties in Nevada, and I have a slide that shows you where some of our properties are and some of our work is. But one of the great things about working for the Nature Conservancy is I get to see these really amazing places in Nevada that TNC's work to conserve. And this is one of them. It's where the fork of the Carson River, two forks of the Carson River meet to come together. And so with that, I will just start a little bit off about the Nature Conservancy if you're not familiar with us. We are a global non-governmental organization, and our mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. We are a science-based organization. About 25% of our staff are scientists, and we use a collaborative, solutions-oriented approach to conservation. So a lot of times what TNC will do in an area is bring together diverse stakeholders to solve conservation problems and enhance sustainability and land conservation that's good for both people and nature. We do have a broad reach. There are chapters in all 50 states of the United States and conservation programs. Many of these chapters got started by, when TNC first began, it was a land trust, essentially. It purchased land to conserve it and also to study it for science purposes. And that has grown. And so TNC owns land in all states, I believe. And then we have conservation programs in 70 different countries and territories across the world, including Africa, Australia, Latin America, Europe, and Asia. This global reach is actually really helpful for implementing programs at large regional scales, especially in the United States when it comes to policy. So in Nevada in particular, this is on the left side is a picture of Independence Lake, which is actually technically located in California. You can see a little icon picture of it right up here. But it is on this side of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And so the Nevada chapter manages it and has acquired it and does manage that property. It's one of the places for the endangered hawk and cutthroat trout. And we manage the forest around there in terms of just managing it for fire resiliency, essentially. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Some of the other places that we have, here's the River Fork Ranch Preserve. You can see the location of that where I previously showed that picture. We significantly, I think, the Nature Conservancy began in 1983 in Nevada. The organization, I think, was established in the 50s earlier, but in Nevada, we began by purchasing originally the land that is now Ash Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. And if you haven't been to Ash Meadows, it's down here. It's located right essentially at the gateway of Death Valley National Park, but it is the home of the famous Devil's Hole pupfish, the first listed endangered species. ever under the Endangered Species Act, but also, that area was going to become a bedroom community. They were going to develop that whole area around Ash Meadows and turn it into housing. And so the Nature Conservancy bought it. And then we turned it over to the Fish and Wildlife Service for managing it. So that's, I think personally, I love that area. So it's, I think, one of our greatest accomplishments in Nevada, but I would also say that there's a lot of really good work happening in all these places that you see indicated by these fun little icons on the map that was drawn by our GIS analyst and also an illustrator. So climate change, back to what we are talking about today. I don't want to be a gloom and doom. I don't want to talk about the causes too much, only to just point out that these are significant climate trends that we're seeing. So in Nevada, scientific projections indicate that we'll experience hotter temperatures, prolonged droughts, and more frequent fires in our forests. Increasing temperatures are causing urban heat island effects in Nevada cities and heat stress to plant and wildlife populations in ecosystems across the state. Increasing heat and aridity will result in more catastrophic wildfires in Nevada's forests, which will threaten our water supplies for communities and wildlife, and then accelerates the spread of invasive species in our rangelands like cheatgrass and some of those non-native annual grasses. The demand for land, I think, importantly, we're implementing climate solutions like renewable energy, but the renewable energy creates a demand for land to support this infrastructure, this generation and transmission infrastructure, and that will increase as Western states seek to decarbonize and move away from fossil fuels. Nevada, importantly, sits at the crossroads of energy development in the United States. And so it's important to think about this electric build out because it could have disastrous effects on our lands and wildlife without careful planning, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But first, I do want to just say, we really do focus on solutions at the Nature Conservancy. We recognize these threats, but we also know that there's positive solutions to be had. And we usually group those in two different categories. The first being mitigation, meaning we reduce greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, and we are hoping to do that. Our goal is to ensure that global warming stays below the recommended 1.5 degrees C, which is recommended by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a body of scientists that has studied this issue for years, 30 years worldwide. And then the second bucket is adaptation and making sure that we can ensure, we know that we're going to see these horrible trends that I showed on the other slide, and we know they're not going to change, they're likely going to get worse. So how can we ensure resiliency for nature and people so that biodiversity and communities can withstand these changing climate conditions? And so at the Nature Conservancy, we do this, or at least here in Nevada specifically, we're thinking about this in three sort of solution buckets. The first being carbon capture and storage to address mitigation. The second being looking at smart from the start siting and planning to address our energy and infrastructure build out. And then the third being looking at how we can protect different places around Nevada to ensure that species have the room to move and to grow, and to make sure that we can provide those safe havens for species as they're experiencing those threats of climate change. And so I'm gonna talk about in this presentation basically these topics in this order. I'm going to talk about renewable energy planning and siting and what we're doing in that area. I'm going to talk about natural climate solutions. I'm going to talk about resilient connected landscapes and this idea of climate passages. And I'm going to focus on two landscapes that we are particularly looking at in Nevada, which is the Amargosa River and the Bossa Wabi, also known as the swamp cedars in Eastern Nevada. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a little bit of research that we've been doing into carbon abatement pathways. And I'll explain all of that. So first, this image, I think, really brings it home to why we're concerned about siting. These projects are really big. They blade out a lot of land traditionally. They are starting to implement techniques that allow some of the vegetation to remain, but the panels, the panels really need to stay low to the ground to withstand the elements, from what I've heard, because we've had conversations with renewable development companies about different mitigation measures, and there's technical design issues that need to be addressed for some of these mitigation things. So we think, well, you know, these are big. We have a lot to build out too. There's states across the country are starting to adopt net zero carbon goals, which means that they want to emit no carbon dioxide emissions, or a net of no carbon dioxide emissions, which means you have to have some way to capture it and store it on the other end, by 2050, which means that we need to electrify a lot of our systems that currently run on fossil energy, like internal combustion engines for transportation. In short, we'll need a lot more electricity to achieve these goals if we are going to maintain the quality of life that we have come to expect in America. And there's been a lot of institutions and organizations that have looked at this and what is it going to take energy-wise to meet these goals of net zero. And Princeton did a study last year, and they looked at what would it take energy-wise to meet these goals across the country. And they found that the land footprint of the new energy infrastructure that needed to be built to meet net zero carbon goals is equal to, or in one scenario anyway, and it was probably the highest electrification scenario, but it's equal to the land area of Colorado and Wyoming combined. So that's a lot of land that we're going to need to transform either with solar or wind or geothermal and energy storage technologies that accompany that. Additionally, the federal government has been noting this build out, and I'll just note that in 2020 the Energy Policy Act was passed, and it included a lot of revisions to the Energy Policy Act, but it mandated that 25 gigawatts of renewable energy be permitted on public lands by 2025. And I believe, I actually don't know where exactly we're at now, but I believe it's less than 1 gigawatt at this point in time. And so the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, and other land management agencies are looking at this and thinking about, okay, now we have to staff up for this. In Nevada, it's particularly, we're going to see that footprint because the state office does expect to site a lot of this energy on our public lands. In addition to that, the state of Nevada, the government of Nevada does want this. They have been pushing to expand renewable energy to meet climate goals in several of the past legislative sessions, and most recently passed legislation to expand electric transmission capacity across the state, which will attract more renewable energy development to the state as well. You know, at the same time, we live in this incredibly amazing state. I mean, especially for nature. We hear these numbers about it being the 11th most biodiverse state, but what does that look like on the ground? And I mean, it's amazing. It's like unlike any other place in the planet, and it's why I moved here, and it's why I'm, you know, a Nevadan by choice. And my hobby is to explore it. And I think really that it's the topography of this state that allows it to be the most biodiverse. We have all of these mountain ranges and these valleys, and this valley, this basin and range structure form in my mind, really like the world's largest series of sky islands. And they all host these unique ecosystems and species among elevational gradients. And so I think in Nevada in particular, you know, we have a lot of these lands of high conservation value, and they're relatively untouched by development at this point in time. Lands with high conservation value are habitat for iconic species, species that were once numerous, but now dwindling at a rapid rate. Recent science says that populations of these species will continue to decline, and they're not the only ones. Many others are imperiled. So in addition to the climate crisis, we have this other sinister crisis, which is the loss of biodiversity, and it's happening across the planet. And there's many reasons for this, but one of those reasons, of course, is habitat loss due to human activity, industrial development, and of course, climate change. And so I think, you know, living in this 11th most biodiverse state in the country, which also happens to be the most arid state in the country, but it's rich with resources, you know, not just the solar and wind resources that we have, but it's like has all these mineral resources like lithium, and these raw materials that are also needed to support this transition to an economy that we need to make in order to survive the climate crisis. So, you know, we think, what can we do? And when it comes to, you know, just one more point before I answer that question, I think when it comes to electricity, I just want to make the point that Nevada sits at a crossroads among Western states. And as I mentioned earlier that Nevada leaders have really turned their sights to Nevada's position as a path to bring renewable energy from wind and solar developments in the Mountain West states to energy markets along the coast. And so the past couple of years have seen this dialogue among policymakers about Nevada's role in electricity markets and the Western interconnection, and that was another result of the recent legislation that was passed. It was Senate Bill 448, and it, you know, designated, it was designed to facilitate $10 billion of investment in transmission infrastructure in Nevada. That was how it was promoted. It mandated that Nevada become part of a regional transmission organization, which means it's a unit of electricity trading that's more coordinated with the other regions. And it sets this stage for this regional connected grid. So we know there's going to be this growth in transmission, and we've already seen this proposal from NV Energy here called GreenLink to create a high voltage KV power line connecting Las Vegas to Urington, and then following Highway 50 here connecting to the Robinson Summit. Now, I will say with this proposal for GreenLink, the side note here is there's been a pretty strong push with the Nature Conservancy supporting this to have the BLM look at an alternative route for this GreenLink North line that would follow I-80, because I-80 is a much more impacted route, and it would service that way to co-locate some of the transmission infrastructure and other infrastructure that we already have in the state. Just one note about some of these proposed projects. You know, I put this up on the screen because there's this little beige highlight here is a complex of 7 projects that are proposed for Esmeralda Valley. So Tonopah is right here. The Highway 95, I'm just going to follow it with my mouse. You can see where it goes. It goes around. So so the GreenLink transmission line is proposed to go this way and right through this complex of 7 projects, meeting up again with Highway 95. And the reason why I point this out is that it's 7 projects totaling 61,463 acres, which is equivalent to 96 square miles. And so if this project complex is built out in the way it's planned, it will be 96 square miles continuous solar panels. And the thing is, you know, in this particular area, there's not too much conflict. It's a little bit away from Tonopah itself. A lot of the conservation organizations have looked at this and have said, actually, it's a pretty low impact area. I will note it is, you know, very close to a solar energy zone, which is what this blue blob is here. And solar energy zones were designated zones where solar could be built in Nevada and actually 6 other states. But more on that later. But I guess, you know, I put that up there because I don't think that people realize how much of the land this is going to take up. And we might need it for our way and our quality of life, but I think it's critically important that we put these projects where they're suitable to go. And so the way that we've approached this at the Nature Conservancy is to ask our state leaders, when you consider the deployment of all of this renewable energy infrastructure, you need to also think about smart from the start energy planning. Smart from the start energy planning identifies and prioritizes lower impact areas where renewable generation, storage, and transmission can be deployed, while minimizing impact to natural lands, cultural resources, recreation, and other conservation values. So let's look at where we want to put it and let's identify the lowest impact area for where we can take it to go. And unfortunately, a lot of times this means more actual monetary cost of the project, or it could mean that. But I think we also need to consider the value that preserving those areas and avoiding those really important areas for conservation or recreation have for communities and then for our quality of life as well. So in order to address this, we've formed a coalition with several other groups, and those groups are listed here on the screen. It's the NRDC, or Natural Resources Defense Council, the Defenders of Wildlife, and the Wilderness Society. And these groups have been actually working on this problem for about 10 years or over 10 years together. And so some of our accomplishments are listed on the screen. We've provided recommendations for the programmatic rulings that the Bureau of Land Management has for siting solar energy, and the wind and solar rule was passed in 2012, or the record of decision for that was 2012. Western Solar Plan, that was 2014. So some of these are pretty old. These are the ones that designated those SEZs that I talked about, those solar energy zones. Some of the other important ones that we've weighed in on are Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, West-Wide Energy Corridors, mitigation recommendations for funds that are collected in solar energy zones, but from developers to support any compensatory mitigation that needs to happen. And then of course, Smart from the Start site energy siting in Nevada. We've also, we know that it's hard to try to kind of coordinate planning around this, but we also know that it is possible with this careful planning to achieve both conservation of natural and working lands and expand our renewable generation portfolio at the same time. And there's opportunities with Nevada's plans for climate action and climate strategy. So in 2020, Nevada adopted a climate strategy, and that highlighted the need in its complex challenges section. It highlighted the need for Smart from the Start renewable energy planning. And it also called out, importantly to us, the role that reclaimed mining lands can play in siting energy, which is another important component of our strategy for sharing energy and infrastructure. We've also reached out to the State Land Use Planning Advisory Council. This is an advisory council that represents all 17 counties in Nevada, and they advise the governor's office. And they recently adopted a policy statement saying that they support the concept of Smart from the Start planning as the state grows in its renewable development. This is a lot of words and names, but the other activity that we're doing to advance this concept in Nevada is convening a group of agency heads from state agencies, and then high-level staff from the federal offices of BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, and EPA. And we're just trying to get them to talk to each other, because we realize that in conversations independently of these with these folks, the federal and the state components weren't talking to each other, but they were all saying, oh, it's that we can't do anything because of the feds, is what the state would say. And then the state would say, well, and then the feds would say, well, the state's really hard to work with. So we kind of like put them together. And this is going really well. This has been happening for like about a year now. And then I think a cool aspect of this, I mentioned mine lands and brownfields and previously dispersed spaces, but we've also been looking around at Nevada's mine lands and thinking, well, that's a lot of areas that are already disturbed, that are already outfitted with electric transmission lines. Mines use a lot of power, and they have power flowing in and out of their operations, so they're already connected to the grid frequently. How can we make it easier to put this renewable development on mine lands and brownfields? And so we started thinking about how to make that happen. And we have these we have basically a three-pronged strategy for doing that. So we wanted to first identify and map those potential sites for renewable development. We wanted to work with stakeholders to implement a pilot project so we could just demonstrate proof of concept. And then we wanted to work with policymakers to incentivize this activity, because it is more expensive. There's liability concerns for contamination sometimes on brownfield sites. And so we just wanted to make this easier and explore this goal. And it's absolutely not a new idea. The EPA has been working for over a decade on their repowering program, which has estimated that they said potentially 6.7 million acres of land, but I would just say, I think this is an old slide, or 6.7 million megawatts of potential on this land. This is a little bit of an old slide. It's actually 43 million acres of land and I think 1.3 million megawatts of potential, but still that's a huge amount of potential to meet our goals from what we need. I mean, you know, that's like a fifth of what the Energy Policy Act wanted to permit. But anyway, you know, according to EPA estimates, there's a lot of these sites that are in Nevada. So we sought to explore that. And then we started to find out that other counties have explored this too. So Lander County explored the feasibility of developing on these sites. And so there's interest out there and we're curious, why isn't it happening? So to understand the legal and regulatory barriers for advancing this type of development on brownfields and minelands, the Conservancy in 2018 commissioned a study from the University of Virginia's Environmental and Regulatory Law Clinic. We learned that one of the major issues was that renewable development and storage was not officially recognized as a valid post-productive use of minelands in Nevada. And so to fix this, the Conservancy worked with some strange bedfellows, the Nevada Mining Association, and together we advocated for a change to the Nevada Administrative Code that would allow for renewable energy development and storage as an allowable post-productive mining use of the land. So here's the regulatory change that was made. It was seemingly small, but it's been an important one for advancing our efforts. For no other reason than this work has generated some positive media attention. At that time, the governor tweeted about it and we received some good positive media hits about it. So we wanted to kickstart the conversation with that and it worked. Then we moved on to identifying minelands and brownfields. And so we worked to better define this opportunity by creating a map tool to visualize the solar, wind, and geothermal potential on all sites in Nevada. And these are just a few images from our tool on this left-hand side. The circles are indicative of both wind. Each circle represents a mineland or brownfield site in Nevada. The size of the circle is indicative of the wind energy potential at the site, and the color of the circle is indicative of the solar energy potential. So the bigger the circle, the higher the wind potential, and the deeper red, the higher the solar energy potential. And then on the right side, we also did the same thing looking at geothermal favorability. And so the darker color circles on the right side there are indicative of higher geothermal favorability. And that right side has a transmission layer overlaid by it. So what we're able to do is look at potential sites with good potential for renewable development and whether or not they're close to transmission, and then we can further explore particular sites. And Barrick in mining is included on this because they funded the map study, and then the Rocky Mountain Institute is based out of Boulder, Colorado, and they helped us really define the parameters for how to put this map tool together. And it's a GIS map tool. It's available publicly. I'm happy to share the link if anybody's interested, so you can play around with the layers and see what's there. And then we dove deeper. So we started working with NDEP, the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection, to say, okay, do you have any abandoned mineland sites that are really good potential? And here's what we're looking for: proximity to transmission. We're looking for electricity infrastructure, and then adequate acreage. I say 100 there, but honestly, I would say 20 acres is even okay for a small setup. And then even cooler than that, we started looking at the Carson River Mercury Superfund site. So this is a really interesting site because it's huge. First of all, this image that you're seeing here is the various operating units that they're called for the Carson River Mercury site. So you have Carson Lake right over here. Reno, you can see, is up here, just to orient you to the map. Carson City's down here. And then the pink area that's highlighted here is called Operating Unit 1. And that is where most of the concentrated contamination, which is mercury, is at these sites. And these were gold mines that were operating for a long time before environmental regulations with a process that would use mercury to separate the gold and silver from the ore. And so a lot of mercury ended up in the watershed for Carson River. And there's probably just in this area alone of OU1 about 230 mill sites. And it's really fascinating place because Virginia City's there, so people still live there. Comstock is a mining company that's still operating there, and we're working with these folks. And I would also add the BLM to this list. They're not on this list, but they should be, because we recently started communicating with them about this too. But we're looking to identify suitable sites. And then I'll just add too that all this orange yellow on the map that you see, that's operating unit 2. And operating unit 2 is basically the whole watershed of the Carson River as it flushes down into Lahontan Dam, which is right here. And then I believe Stillwater Wildlife Refuge is up here or here, one of these. Excuse me. So anyway, we're in the process of feasibility studies at this site funded by EPA, and I think it would be really a good story to have, just, if we can find a suitable site. I'll just add too that all of this work involves policy work. And so I am regularly communicating with our Nevada delegation. It's Senator Cortez Masto, as you see, visited one of our sites. This is not the Carson River Mercury site, it's a different site that we're investigating, but she toured this site last August on her August recess. And really what we're asking her to do is to help us with Build Back Better, or the Reconciliation Act, if you will. We're very supportive of the clean energy tax credits, and we're trying to get an additional tax adder added that would make it even more beneficial for renewable companies to develop on these sites. They would get an additional tax credit if they developed on these sites. So we're working with Senator Cortez Masto on that. We're working with Senator Rosen's office on codifying that EPA repowering program I told you about. It provides technical assistance to all 50 states, and it's an Obama era program, but it's not one that's officially written into statute. And so a lot of times with these types of programs, the one good way to make sure it sticks around is to codify it. So we're working that. And then also you all probably heard about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It's kind of a mouthful, but that provided $500 million for clean energy demonstration project on current and former mine lands. So cross your fingers that something cool will happen soon. And I'm hoping that like all of these sites that we're looking at will go and get developed. So switching gears, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about natural climate solutions, because this is also where the Nature Conservancy really thrives. I mean, we've looked at this with our scientists, and it shows that natural climate solutions, which are those that are based on the conservation, restoration, and management of forests, grasslands, and wetlands, can deliver up to 1/3 of the emission reductions needed by 2030. So they can take care of 1/3 of our emission reductions needed. This was done several years ago. And I think really it's just such powerful research to show that we can harness the power of nature to reduce our emissions and also do something that's really helpful for nature itself. And it could be our natural storage for some of our carbon. So what does this look like on the ground? I think like sometimes, we talk about natural climate solutions, and it's hard for us to really understand this. So our teams do work on things that I think can boost natural climate solutions. I think it's just really hard to measure what exact impact are you having on mitigation. So I just gave some examples here. This is, I'm gonna start, I guess, on the left side with these before and after pictures. And the Nature Conservancy for about 15 years has worked to restore a section of the lower Truckee River below Reno, but above Pyramid Lake. And these are some before and after pictures of that. And you can see, I mean, you revegetate something and it will store more carbon. So I think there's certainly a natural climate solution there. This lovely person in the center of the screen is our sagebrush manager, that's Liz Munn. She's working on seed technologies and to enhance the growth of native seeds and provide them with the nutrients that they can. And some of those are shown here. They basically pack the seeds into these little like carbon pods, if I understand correctly, and I know just enough to be dangerous there. And then finally, this before and after picture at the bottom is in the Amargosa River area, in probably around the Beatty area, where we planted 40,000 trees last year, and then we planted another 30,000 willow trees this year. And these are before and after pictures, which I think they're a year apart. So before and then a year later, you can see the vegetation growth up there. And so not only does this create habitat for species, it also has that added benefit of hopefully giving that ecosystem more potential to store carbon. And then the next several slides are just some more before and after pictures of that Truckee River restoration, because I think it's just so interesting what they did there. I mean, they really did like a interesting capital investment project. And thanks to Senator Reed for the Desert Terminal Lakes funding program, which supported a lot of this work. And then, you know, after that project, our Sierra Nevada program managers started to look to, well, one of the biggest threats to the Truckee River watershed is wildfire and catastrophic wildfire in the Truckee River watershed, upper watershed, you know, the forested area. We all have seen these devastating impacts. It can just turn some really clean water into sludge for a long time. And so how can we enhance and understand how we can mitigate this threat? Because it's a big one, right? I mean, we need to understand whole forest systems and how they're overgrown. And so this is where I think some of TNC's work is really interesting with respect to mapping, because what their team ended up doing was using some of our mapping and modeling tools to look at where the risk, I'm going to go from left to right on these pictures, like where the risk of stand replacing fire in the Truckee River watershed is the highest, where that soil yield from those fires could result in the greatest like flux of all of that soil and sludge into water systems. And then from there, where is the restoration priority to mitigate these two threats? And can we find that using our filtration modeling? And we can. And so they just recently published this research, and we're hoping that it's used to inform on policy and really, you know, help these things, help lower wildfire frequency, protect water resources, improve wildlife habitat. You know, thinking about these sort of larger climate solutions and our larger landscapes, it's not just our forests, it's our rangelands that are under threat. And so how can we best protect them? And then I'll just make a note really quickly here that the other interesting thing about the Nature Conservancy is it's not just this scientific look and modeling stuff, we're actually practitioners. And so this picture down here of the controlled burn at Independence Lake Preserve is contract crews that we hired at that I Lake Preserve I talked about earlier in the talk to basically use fire to fight fire, which is one of the most effective ways, although it is very scary and needs to be used very carefully. Let's see, next slide. And so another way that we're thinking about this, and I'm just looking at the time, okay, I'm talking your ears off, you guys, is with resilient connected landscapes. And so if I'm gonna try to share this video, and I think that I need to do something here with video settings, but I have a really cool video to describe resilient connected landscapes, because the Nature Conservancy is thinking about how to preserve these ecosystems called resilient connected landscapes across the United States. And they have mapped areas that are you know, good, suitable for migration of species, where species can migrate in response to the threat of climate change. And they have modeled places or locations that would offer good refuge for species. And so if I can play this video, and hopefully I can do that. Can you all see that and hear that?
No.
Yeah.
I think you need to share the video screen.
Okay, I need to share that. All right. Okay, so are you not hearing it?
No.
Are you seeing it?
No, we're not seeing or
No,
hearing
we
it.
don't see a video.
Okay, let me see. Advanced sharing options, I think. Okay. I'm gonna do this, and I'm just hoping that sound will work. So you should probably see the YouTube video
Now we
right
can.
now.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna play it and then let me know if it doesn't work.
Don't hear it, but you can see it.
You can see it, but not hear it. But at least
Okay.
with captions, we can read the captions.
Okay, you can see it, but not hear it. Let me try one more thing. And see if I can share sound. I think that works. Okay, thanks you guys. You'd think I would know how to make this work by now. We've all been doing this for so long. Okay, I'm gonna play it again.
There we go. Yes.
At one time, climate change was something that seemed a long way off, and it was something we were anticipating with dread. But right now, we are experiencing it day in and day out.
We're seeing the climate changing at a scale and a pace that we've never seen before. We're seeing a loss of not only species, but an abundance of species across our ecosystems.
Anyone that has a connection to the natural world in their way of life or in their home is experiencing and seeing these changes.
Plants and animals are moving in response to climate. And to be able to move to habitats that are suitable, they need to be able to move through the landscape.
If nature's moving, how do we know the places we're protecting are going to be the important places in the future? So we started working on the question of how do you determine that from looking at a place?
Over 150 scientists led by the Nature Conservancy have been working together for over a decade to identify a special network of lands that are resilient to climate change.
Resilient and connected science is at the core of our land protection and our water protection efforts.
So we're really looking at protecting the land that will facilitate wildlife movement in the face of climate change.
Resilient habitats provide options for species. We call these options microclimates, so can a species find the microclimate that's most suitable to it?
Connectedness means the ability for plants and animals to be able to move around and be resilient in the face of climate change.
We're no longer looking at small, isolated places. We're looking at how to keep an entire connected network across an entire continent together, because that's really what nature needs in order to survive through climate change.
If we conserve this resilient and connected network, it stores massive amounts of carbon.
Every dollar invested in nature is going to protect species tomorrow, 10 years from now, and 100 years from now.
We can't wait to act. With the climate changing and with biodiversity on the decline, the time is now to act to conserve these places.
Okay. Oh no, I need to stop it on my screen. Hold on. Okay. So I like that just because it's they do a good job of really describing what we are talking about at the Nature Conservancy by resilient connected landscapes. And so, you know, our chapter in Nevada was part of that effort, that big mapping effort. But then the interesting thing about the Nature Conservancy is it really is a place-based organization, in that each business unit or state really can take that information and do what it thinks is the best way to approach, you know, protecting those places. And so in Nevada, we have been working on what we're calling climate corridors and this climate corridor project. And so on the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to see a map with a bunch of colorful splotches across it. And this is a conceptual map. I call it a hypothesis. It's basically what our science team sat down with, looking at, you know, so the map of resilient connected landscapes, which is actually pretty coarse data because it's from across the United States, and thinking, how will we operationalize this to understand the best places to protect especially as we're thinking about, you all have probably heard about 30 by 30 and these protect 30% of lands by 2030 efforts. And as we're thinking about what places we really need to protect that have the most meaning for species in the future, let's look to where can they be resilient in the face of climate change. And so a couple of areas that I'm going to really focus on here are the Amargosa and this Amargosa Valley Central Nevada Passage, which is down here in western Nevada, near the California border. Geez Louise, geography tonight. And then over here in eastern Nevada is this what's called the Monsoon Passage, because it's located really at that sort of I guess eastern edge of where the monsoon temporal pattern exists. And so the area that I'll be talking about here, and that's actually shown here on the screen in the picture, is the Spring Valley area. And this is Basawabi. I mentioned there was a place to protect called Basawabi, and that is these sacred swamp cedars that are sacred to the tribes of the area. They're the Shoshone tribes and the Confederated Tribes of the Goshute, who are their reservations about right up here. And then Ely Duckwater Tribe, which is right around here. All right, moving forward, the other area that TNC has been working in, and Ash Meadows is part of this system, the Amargosa system, is Oasis Valley in Amargosa. So let me get back there. This is a picture on the screen of our recently acquired property. You can see it's kind of faint, but I'll point it out. This is the California-Nevada border here, and the river Amargosa River is really interesting. It's just this beautiful river that's mostly underground. It has springs that emerge and some surface flow, and a lot of these places that the Nature Conservancy has purchased that are in green here or protected, and we have some areas that are properties here in California as well, but they're the areas where those springs emerge, and they're the areas that we particularly want to protect. This up here right around Beatty is actually the headwaters of the Amargosa River, and then it goes underground for some period of time, and then it reemerges at different places, and it's just like these oases in the desert. And I mean, you can only imagine if you're a bird and you're flying over the Mojave Desert, it's this just parched, arid, dry landscape until you see this river of green and sometimes blue. And so we're a lot of our tree planting efforts are focused in this area as well. And this too is where some of that restoration work has been happening. All right, I think that's all I want to say about that. This is the Basawabi, or the swamp cedars, and this is a map that the Nature Conservancy put together, and it's really highlighting here vegetation. So like the dark purple are phreatophytes, which I never say that right, but they're basically groundwater dependent vegetation on the ground, and then there's some wetlands and some other what we call groundwater dependent ecosystem classes within Spring Valley. But these areas are incredibly important to the tribes up there. There was a National Geographic article shown here on the screen that was published a little bit I think it was last fall, about this area. And then there was some bills that went through the state legislature last year that sought to protect this area, and they were supported with bipartisan support. They were passed with bipartisan support to protect this area, protect the trees specifically as a specific vegetation class. And then there was a second bill that the Nevada legislature asked Congress to create more protections for this area, like a national monument. And it's impressive that that was supported, bipartisan support in the Nevada legislature. And I'll also just say, I mean, the reason why it was so sacred is it was this traditional meeting site for the tribes in the area, and they gathered there. And then unfortunately, because it was a gathering site, it was also a target for the massacres that happened there. And so the people there believe this is a really unique species, unique population, not a unique species. It's Rocky Mountain juniper, but it's unique that it's in this valley and growing as low as it does. And it's because of all of the water underneath there. And the people believe that the blood from their ancestors has spilled and is a part of these trees now. And so it's incredibly sacred area. It's something I think from a climate perspective is really important to protect. If you recall on this map here, you know, this is the area we're talking about, big splotch of purple in our conceptual map. So, and from certainly a sacred cultural perspective. Okay, what am I have 7:51. I can't believe I've talked this long. I have one more section and then I'll see if you guys have any questions. But more recently, we've also been starting to think about carbon reduction and management. I talked a little bit about the IPCC, or I mentioned the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they just came out with another report, a third report about climate solutions 2 weeks ago. And their climate solutions talk a lot about carbon removal. They said we need to mitigate emissions. We need to, you know, not produce those emissions. We need to avoid them. We need to switch technologies that don't have carbon emissions. But you know what? We also need to look at these technologies that can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And so we started last year actually looking at this as a potential in Nevada, and we started it with what we're our Mining the Sun program, because we were trying to create another, you know, maybe a business incentive for a mine to put renewable energy on their land if they're able to couple carbon capture to it and also make money off of that. Anyway, we have explored lots of pathways for climate. But this study actually turned out to be really elegant because it looked at a full suite of carbon abatement pathways for Nevada. So this is we partnered with the University of Pennsylvania, and they have the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy. And we started working with their director for this Center for Energy Policy, who is also a scholar at the World Resources Institute and a scholar in carbon reduction removal. And she now is actually the senior deputy assistant for carbon management at the Department of Energy under the Biden administration. And so we continued the work after she got tapped by the Biden administration into this. And this is the publication that was recently produced by that. And it's a policy digest, basically trying to break down, you know, how to think about this. And so I'll just go through some of those sections. You know, in Nevada, we look at the greenhouse gas emissions from an economy-wide perspective. On the left side is the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, broken down by sectors of transportation, electricity, industry, residential and commercial, and agriculture. And then on the right-hand side is that same breakdown for Nevada. So you can kind of see how we compare. We have higher transportation emissions, but overall transportation emissions are just a huge part of the pie. And we also have a little bit higher electricity, although pretty close there. And yeah, interesting to think about there. And then the industry, higher industry, and that makes sense too. So the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection is now mandated to measure these greenhouse gas emissions in these different sectors every year. Every year for some of the sectors, and then every 4 years for other sectors. But they're required to measure the electrification sector and the transportation sector every year. And they, you know, they predict that they're going to miss their goals. This red line here shows the prediction by NDEP. The blue line is where the goals are that are required by state law, and actually now in our Constitution too, I think. And this red line is where Nevada Division of Environmental Protection projected the state to be. So we're missing the mark. And so we were thinking, well, how can we get there? Because I will say, I'm going to go back to this really quickly. The goal, the ultimate goal is this net zero goal by 2050. So we got a long way to go. Thinking about this more, I've talked a lot about this. I think first and foremost, it's just reducing emissions, emitting fewer of them into the atmosphere. Second, we can think about avoiding them. So can we put capture storage technology on our natural gas plants? Can we capture the carbon from cement factories and lime factories, some of these really big carbon emitters that we know to be out there? Can we capture carbon from individual vehicles? That's a very interesting question. For all of those emissions that we can't reduce or avoid, there is the option to take them back and pull them from the atmosphere in direct air capture systems. And so the research team evaluated all of these different options, and they looked at 5 different scenarios, ranging from a business as usual where nobody changes up to the best case, most optimistic scenario that you could absolutely possibly hoped for. Not necessarily realistic, but it gives an idea of how you can, you know, fine tune some of these different mitigation strategies to achieve zero emissions. And what are some of those mitigation strategies? Well, they involve electrification, reducing the use of fossil fuels, reducing highly potent greenhouse gas emissions. So like, you know, those cooling elements that are just hold a lot more heat than CO2 does in the atmosphere. We can try fuel switching. We can improve our efficiency in buildings, high efficiency heat pumps, improved livestock management and land management, and reduced waste. They looked at they wrapped up all of these strategies into their different scenarios. And then on top of that, they said after they looked at all of these different mitigation avoidance strategies, they said, well, in each scenario, knowing that, you know, the best case is definitely more aggressive, how much more carbon dioxide would you need to capture from the air? So that's what this direct air capture is. And then when you capture it, you have to do something with it. And that's storage. That's long-term geologic storage. That's maybe storage by mineralization with mine wastes, mine tailing waste. Could we do that and mineralize that and create maybe some construction aggregates? Can you mineralize it? Can you store it by creating new products with it? That's when you hear the carbon capture, use, and storage, that's that use component of that strategy. But basically this slide is saying the more we mitigate, the more we avoid and mitigate and reduce emissions, the less carbon storage we will need if we want to achieve a goal of net zero by 2050. Okay. That's my presentation. This is a picture of the 7J Ranch at the headwaters of the Amargosa. It's a beautiful spot. And I will stop there. Thank you all for your attention. Any questions?
Jaina, we did have a question. It's in the chat. Let me see if I can find it now. There we go. Oh my gosh.
I see one that's recorded. Yeah, I had somebody send me a question directly about renewable development not fitting under the industry label for post-mining use. And I think maybe, you know, that's an interesting question that it probably could have, but I think more so than the roadblock we kept hearing was that it's not an allowable use. It's not an allowable use. And if you say, well, is it an industry? And it just, like, mining companies just didn't think it was an allowable use, so they wouldn't even consider it. So the effort to make it fully recognized, I think helped achieve that recognition. So I hope that I used recognized several times there, but I think it just gains that gave us the opportunity to talk about the idea in a way that policymakers would listen. So yes, rooftops. Such a good question. So we definitely need that. And you're right, it is baffling. And I think we all should be pushing for that, because not just parking lots, but I think commercial rooftops, because that seems to be Las Vegas, Nevada, and Southern Nevada's economic development plan is like build more warehouses, right? You guys have all seen the proliferation of those along Highway 15, at least like I have. But, you know, I think the rules are just, one of the problems right now is the net metering rules for Nevada don't allow for the like if somebody were to put a big system and have the ability to load up that much electricity onto the system and receive a credit for it, like the net metering laws are capped. So the amount of electricity that can be accepted onto the system by NV Energy is capped at a really low level. I don't even know what it is, but I know it's low and it's prohibitive. And so it just doesn't create the incentive for companies to install solar panels over their parking lots or their rooftops because they can't really sell that power if they overproduce. Although it would absolutely solve our problem, and I think we should definitely encourage our policymakers to find ways to address this issue, because it is absolutely ridiculous that we have this much open space and we're not putting panels on it, but we're building renewable energy way out in the middle of the desert. So that's partially my own opinion.
It's a valid opinion. Anyone else have questions for Jaina?
Actually, I do. This is Mitch. On that early slide, when you're showing the pictures of some of the Nature Conservancy's lands, I saw over in the corner of great interest to us a blob that said the Virgin River. Do you know what they have going on there and how that is on your slide?
Yeah, that's with we've been working with the Virgin River. Oh man, they had your presentation last month. What are they called? The Virgin River
Coalition.
Coalition, thank you.
Yeah.
So our staff started those conversations. We had a grant to really look at the Virgin River because we were concerned about the fish in the Virgin River and the native, and essentially they're imperiled because the river is too warm, flowing out of Utah into Nevada. And then you know, the diversions that happen, they're really not measured. I mean, there's water coming back, but there's so many ways to probably improve in-stream flows in the Virgin River between the Utah border and down to Lake Mead. And it involves coordinating with all of those stakeholders, all of the groups that are part of that Virgin River Coalition. And so about 4 years ago, the Nature Conservancy started convening those groups, and they brought in a facilitator to help with that process. And it has since resulted in the coordinator who spoke to you last month about the Virgin River Coalition. I know that they were able to then apply for a grant to fund her position and to start formalizing that group, hopefully so that they can now start applying for some improvement projects along the river. So, and I hope, I don't know if, I know Friends of Gold Butte was involved in some of the meetings, and so I hope you guys are still doing that, but that was the work that we were referring to along the Virgin River.
Yeah, and we are in sort of coordinating discussions with them to how to be more collaborative between both groups.
Great, excellent.
James
Hi,
brought
Jaina.
up-
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, hi, Jaina, it's Terry.
Hi, Terry.
Hi, I imagine that in some ways you're probably preaching to the choir here, because I think we all, I would imagine that most of these people are on board with what's happening. And thank you for all the information and the data. It's really helpful. What I'm wondering is, what can we as individuals do? Sometimes we kind of feel helpless. We feel like, you know, one person, what can I do? You have any thoughts about that?
I think it's important to vote for politicians that will do something about climate, first of all, and then, you know, there's so many nuances to it. I think that's what I started to realize when you get involved. There's so many people that are like, yes, we need more clean energy and we need more clean energy, but we also at the same time need to think about where it goes. And so I think the other thing that people can do is when they hear, or when they, you know, if you're talking to a policymaker, or if you're at a public meeting and you decide that there's a climate issue or an issue about renewable energy, or you have the opportunity to talk about the importance of renewable energy siting, I think more people need to talk about it, because the people who are making the decisions need to hear that. And particularly the Bureau of Land Management needs to hear that we need to site our renewable energy infrastructure in low impact ways. And not only that, but we need alternatives that will help us make those decisions. It can't just be the infrastructure that's going on the ground in the plans deciding that plan, because it's probably not the best plan. And so I think as individual people, I mean, this group, I've always been amazed, you know, has written letters to the editor or has just made these points in forums that you guys have open to you. You know, I think it's just making that point if you're engaged in that space, and trying to put people in office that'll do something about the problem. And I'll say too, I mean, there's a lot of personal things that we all can do a little bit better, but I think the reason why policy is so important is because most people aren't doing those things. I mean, the way that our systems are structured, the way that our infrastructure is structured, we are forced into these systems that require fossil fuels. We have to get, like, I have to get in my car and drive to the grocery store. If I walked, it would take me 2 hours to get there. You know, I mean, we need more options in our society, and that takes public investment, and that takes policy to make happen. So I think that's what we can all do, is to pay attention, and if we can voice that concern and reason. Thanks for the question.
I see James has put up that PBS's Frontline. This is in the chat for those of you that want to check it out, but the Power of Big Oil Denial aired that last night, and then parts 2 and 3 are on the 26th and May 3rd, and that might be something that we would like to watch.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
It was so nice to talk to you all and see some familiar faces, and I think about Go Butte every day. So thank you for everything that you're doing, and for those of you who go out and pick up trash, thank you. And for those of you who are commenting on the management plan, thank you. Just thank you for being there and doing what you're doing, and for volunteering at the office. I just thank you.
No, it's been going really well. We have a lot of great people, and they are getting a lot done. And it's because of your leadership in the beginning that it's all coming to fruition, but it's rolling right along. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'll kick it back to Nancy Hall. It's because of her good leadership early.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I think it takes a village, and we've got a pretty good village. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Take care, you guys. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you. Good night, everybody.